Hello, welcome to the Pitcher Nail Down. I'm Big Italy 42. He's Scott Mayo. We got Sports 25 to life, and we're giving you the breakdown for tonight's short slate. Just 6 games. Each pitcher, whether we're playing them, whether they're cash game plays, whether they're GPP plays, if they're better plays on one site, also which pitchers we're targeting, and which pitchers we're stacking against. So we'll give you the complete rundown here. Shouldn't take too long with only 12 pitchers on the mound tonight. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and start here at the top. And that's with Matt Harvey. And you got him as a small favorite. I'm seeing minus 137 right now against the Cardinals and John Lackey. Obviously, you like the fact this has a really low total at 6.5. And, you know, what you don't like is the fact that St. Louis is one of the better offenses, especially against right-handed pitching in the league. I mean, as you look at it, it's, of course, the Dodgers and then everyone else. But the Cardinals still sitting there at 5th in Team WOBA against righties. A decent team, ISO 138, not great, not spectacular, but you know, this is a team that puts the ball in play. They don't strike out a ton at 18.4%. But with that being said, Matt Harvey is obviously an elite pitcher. You're certainly targeting him. I prefer someone else in cash games. I think you do too. But on DraftKings, if you go in 2 expensive pitchers, I think Harvey's got to be one of them if you're paying up for 2, right? In cash games, that is.
Yeah, it's hard not to feel okay about him. I mean, there's no one in the St. Louis lineup as good as they've been that really scares you.
Yeah,
is the thing. I mean, Matt Holliday's kind of that guy, but he's not a guy that I'm overly worried about either. And Matt Carpenter's probably their best hitter, but he's not a guy that's just going to put it into the seats twice in one game on you very often. Or I don't know if he's ever done that.
I don't think so.
So it's not one of those situations where you're facing I don't know. I'm trying to think of a really good hitting team from recently where you're just terrified. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Where you're going 4 guys in a row in the order that you're terrified is just going to take you yard. You don't really have to worry about that, despite them being one of the better teams. Like you said, Harvey's been one of, if not the best pitcher on the young season so far. And I mean, as far as cash games go, he's just been really safe. Is the big thing.
Yeah.
I mean, he's had, I think, one start where he was really disappointing.
Yeah, I think it was
the one against Philly.
Yeah.
And he was fine in that game. He gave up 3 runs in 6 innings or whatever. I mean, I think that's probably around the floor of what you're getting tonight against St. Louis. You're not going to be happy with that if you're paying 10-6 for him on DraftKings and the most expensive price on FanDuel too. But you're also not going to hate it in cash games because he's not really letting you down in any way there. But outside of that, he's been really, really good. I mean, we saw him go 7+ innings in 3 of the last 4, actually. And once he's doing that, I mean, that takes a ton of the risk out of him at his price point. Because, I mean, early in the season, people were getting upset because he was only pitching 6 innings and coming out of the game even when he was only at 95 pitches or whatever. When he's getting up over 100 pitches most of the time, pitching 7 innings, I mean, you're going to get a quality game out of him almost every time.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, no individual hitter that really terrifies you here. No huge bats, and he hasn't allowed a home run to a right-handed hitter yet this season.
Yeah.
So, I mean, 4 to lefties, yes, but when you think about the power as far as the lefties in the St. Louis lineup, there's really not much at all. I mean, Matt Carpenter, I think, has the highest ISO of any lefty on that team right now. So, it's you're obviously, like you said, no double dong concerns there. There's no Miguel Cabrera or Giancarlo Stanton or Mike Trout in this lineup that you have to worry about. So, excuse me. So anyway, seems like he's a fine option, but there's other options as well. We'll go ahead and move down here to Chris Sale. $10,000 on FanDuel, $9,500 is a great price on DraftKings. I think you and I both agree that he's our favorite option on the nights against a Cleveland lineup that on surface looks average against lefties, but when you look deeper, you've got really huge numbers. Over a 500 WOBA by Michael Brantley against lefties. Ryan Rayburn over a 450 WOBA. So if you take those 2 guys out, this is a very bad team against lefties. And then you even got Carlos Santana, who's now day-to-day for tonight. I saw that, so he's maybe he's not in the lineup. You take out a big bat like Carlos Santana out of this lineup, there's not a whole lot of resistance outside of Michael Brantley that you're worried about at all with Chris Sale. So,
yeah, I mean, there's really nothing to argue with there. He's going to be really, really heavily owned, especially on DraftKings where you're going 2 pitchers, and he feels like the best one from the price point below him and the price point above him. I mean, I'm expecting him to be probably 65% in cash games, I would think, on DraftKings, maybe even higher than that, honestly. Just because of the way the whole day sets up with Harvey facing a really good offense. Cole Hamels pitching in Colorado, who we'll get to in a minute here. I mean, he's just going to be ridiculously heavy owned. You almost have to have him in cash games unless you really feel strongly he's not going to have a nice game, which I'd love to hear someone's reasoning for that because I can't come up with one. So I think you got to go him in cash games. He's fadeable in GPP just because he's been a little bit up and down this year. But, I mean, the problem is finding another pitcher that can give you anything near what he can give you on this slate because, I mean, you're just, even the best pitchers on the slate, like I said, you're running into the Cardinals and you're running into Coors Field with the other two top options on this slate, so there's just not a lot of other ways to go.
Yeah, and Chris Sale's dominance against lefties is really incredible. I mean, since the beginning of 2013, he's faced 307 left-handed batters and has not allowed a single home run. And during that span, he's only allowed, I believe it's 6 extra base hits total in 2+ seasons. So, I mean...
Yeah, it's crazy.
He legitimately might be the best pitcher in the game against left-handed hitting. And as we know, Cleveland doesn't really have righties they can just take off the bench and throw in there tonight. Or at least not.
Yeah, right. Especially with Rayburn banged up. Aviles is a little banged up too. I mean, and those guys aren't even scary guys against lefties. I mean, they're pretty good hitters against lefties, but I mean, Sale's not your average lefty either. That is just getting thrown out there because he's a lefty.
Yep.
And you're trying to give teams another look. I mean, Sale's one of the 5 best pitchers in the major leagues, if not top 3 or something like that when he's right.
I'm with you there. I got him 3. But, yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue top 5. And it's, like you said, I mean, it's really nothing going against Chris Sale tonight other than not being a huge favorite. But that's because he's opposed by Corey Kluber, who's coming off of his ridiculous performance in the last game. 18 Ks, 56.8 DraftKings points. So if you had him that day, you probably did pretty well, even if you didn't get any hits from your team. But, yeah, Corey Kluber, $10,100 on DraftKings and $9,800 on FanDuel. Obviously a small underdog on the road against the White Sox. But at the same time, this is a White Sox team that is not very good against right-handed pitching. They're 16th in the league with a 316 WOBA. 120 team ISO is very small. They only strike out 18.5% of the time. But I don't know. I'm conflicted on Kluber because I do think he'll be very heavily owned, especially in GPPs on DraftKings because of that last performance. But before that, it wasn't that he just didn't look great. He looked really bad. I mean, Cleveland lost every single start that he had. I mean, granted, the first one they shouldn't have lost. He was great over 8 innings against Minnesota, but they lost every other start that he's had this season. And he already pitched against the White Sox in U.S. Cellular once this year. Gave up 13 hits in 6 innings, had 6 Ks, 6 fantasy points on FanDuel. Obviously, not saying that's going to happen again, but I personally want to see more than one start from him where he looks dominant before I'm throwing him in any cash games.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's a tough part there. He is probably my favorite GPP alternative to Sale today just because, I mean, the inverse correlation with Sale blowing up and him probably getting a win in that game is just too good to pass up in GPPs because if Sale for some reason gives up 4 runs and Kluber's throwing a nice game and gets a win there, I mean, that's going to be massive if you're eliminating 65% of the field and gaining a max edge on them like that. I think he's by far the best GPP play today in this price range at least. And I mean, he did look great last game too. That's the thing. And he's been a good pitcher over his career. So while he struggled on the season so far, it's not like that was just a fluke that he can never do that again. No, I mean, he's not going to do that again, probably.
No, not with that number of strikeouts. No.
I still can't believe they took him out of that game. That's what blows my mind. If I was that pitcher, with a chance to set the all-time strikeouts record, and he was at 113 or 116 pitches or something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
I mean, I would have went out there for the 9th for sure. I mean, I can't believe he was okay with coming out. I don't know. I didn't see an interview with him after the game or whatever to see what he said about that, but I'm just so surprised he came out. He could have finished a one-hitter and struck out 21 guys and had, I mean, that probably tops that ESPN most dominant performance of all time. That was Kerry Wood's 20 strikeout one-hitter, right?
Yeah, I think that they said he was the only pitcher who's had at least 18 Ks over 8 innings and didn't finish the game.
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason not to let him. You have a chance to set a record that's been, I mean, how long has that record been 20 Ks? 40-something years or something like that?
I mean, it's probably it's in the 20s. I think that was in the 90s, wasn't it, Kerry Wood?
Oh yeah, it was Clemens, wasn't it, that set it originally at 20, and then Wood tied it. So yeah, at least 20-something years. I mean, that's massive.
Yeah, and I think he struck out the side in the 8th, didn't he? Too?
Yeah, he did. That's the thing.
Two.
He gave up a hit in the 8th, but it wasn't like he was really cooling off. He struck out 3 guys and gave up like a decent single or whatever. So it was just really surprising to see him come out. But early in the season, he was looking pretty good too. I mean, it wasn't like he's been bad all season. He hasn't been getting wins like you mentioned. That was his first win of the year. But the first 3 starts of the season, he went at least 6 1/3. Gave up 2 earned runs in each of the 3. He was getting hit around a little bit. He's given up 7 or more hits in every game except that great game he pitched last time out. So that's a little concerning there. But he's always been a guy that's given up a lot of hits because he tries to make really, really good pitches and makes mistakes at times. So that's why I like him as a GPP play tonight. There's just a lot of upside with him. And like I said, the inverse correlation with Sale just makes him an awesome GPP play for me. But I agree with you. Not a guy I'm looking at in cash games a ton as an underdog, despite the good matchup.
Yeah, and that's a really great point with the GPP strategy there, with everyone being on sale. Like I said, that could pay off in a huge way if you roll him, and I think a lot of people will, of course. So moving on next, we've got a great arm in Cole Hamels at $8,900 on DraftKings, $96 on FanDuel. Unfortunately, he's pitching in Coors Field. But then you go back to another positive for him, and that is that the Rockies are 24th in the major leagues against left-handed pitching, and they're striking out a whopping 25.5% of the time. Also, there's definitely no Justin Morneau, possibly no Corey Dickerson, possibly no Troy Tulowitzki, and there's 2 of the better left-handed hitters, hitters against lefties, not Dickerson, but Tulo, one of the best hitters against lefties in the entire game. So you take out a couple more big bats there. And, I mean, it's a less than intimidating offense. You do have the wind blowing in, but obviously outside of tournaments, you can't be encouraging Cole Hamels. But we saw what he did against the Pirates, who were terrible against lefties. He had a great performance. 1 bad inning there, but still managed to have a really nice outing overall.
Yep.
So, I mean, a lot of things going for him. Really, the only thing you don't like is that he's at Coors Field.
Yeah, definitely. And, I mean, the other thing that's hard to like is the Phillies' offense, even at Coors Field, doesn't make you feel really good about it. That's the other downfall there, is he's not going to pick up a lot of cheap wins where the Phillies just go out and score 8 runs in the first 5 innings and he can just kind of settle in and cruise to a win.
Ever.
Right. I mean, even in Coors, I'm not expecting this Philly offense to just go crazy at any point. I mean, they might start scoring 4 or 5 runs a game here during this series, but, I mean, they're averaging, like 2.7 runs or 2.8 runs per game right now, and I think it's even less in Hamels starts. So they're really struggling. I think he's a good GPP play, though, like you mentioned. There's a lot of peripheral stuff working in his favor. The big concern is at Colorado and the Phillies' offense behind him, but he's got a lot of pretty good matchups in this game, and, I mean, he's still a really strong pitcher.
Yeah, and what's really crazy is the Phillies are no longer last in Team WOBA against righties. That now belongs to the Angels, that tells you how bad the Angels' offense has been. That the Phillies are now 29th. So congrats to the Phillies on getting out of that number 30 hole. But, yeah, like you said, hard to expect to win, even though Jordan Laws on the other side struggles with lefties. They've got some good lefty bats. Well, lefty bats that used to be good, at least, for the Phillies. So with that being said, I mean, I think Cole Hamels is a great contrarian GPP play, like you said, because no one ever plays pitchers in Coors. So you almost are going to be forced to play him in a couple tournaments if you're playing a lot of lineups tonight, just because there's no options. But, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see if he can hold down that lineup. I mean, if all those big bats are out, I might throw him in a couple extra GPP tournaments tonight just to see. But a little bit of speculation with him there tonight, though.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, next up we have Mike Fiers. He's sitting at $8,600 on DraftKings and $7,400, much cheaper on FanDuel. I mean, he's a high strikeout guy, 29.7% strikeout rate this year, but also a fly ball pitcher. He's given up 6 home runs this year. You're a little bit concerned about that, but it's also in Detroit, which is definitely a pitcher's park. But he also gets that murder's row, like you were talking about the earlier offenses in St. Louis, how there's not a big row of hitters you're really worried about. But when you're facing Detroit and you get Miguel Cabrera, Victor Martinez, JD Martinez, Cespedes, all in a row, that's 4 guys that could take you out in 4 straight pitches, especially a fly ball pitcher. So Fiers, for me, not a guy I'm really looking at tonight because he is going against the Tigers, who are second best in the league against righties. Nice team ISO 145. They have, at times, disappeared against right-handed pitching. I mean, it seems like they're either scoring 2 runs or they're scoring 12. But if you put a gun to my head now and said, Are they going to score 2 runs or 12 tonight? I have to pick one. I'd go 12 before I'd go 2. I just don't have a lot of faith in Mike Fiers fooling this lineup tonight.
No, I don't really either. And like you said, it's just a tough lineup. There's really no reason to pay. I mean, I'd rather go with Hamels.
Yep.
At a really similar price. And, I mean, I'm just not a big fan of playing guys against Detroit. Like you said, it's tough to go through that lineup, especially as a strikeout pitcher when you're throwing a lot of pitches like he does. I mean, it's going to be tough for him to get through that lineup 2 or 3 times. They're going to see a lot of pitches against him, have a good feeling of what they're going to get from him each at bat. If he gets to the 3rd time through the lineup, I'd be more scared than excited. So,
yeah.
Not a guy I'm looking to target very much. The guy I like a little bit below him, though, is John Lackey at 8,200 on DraftKings. I think he's a pretty decent GPP play. Even a decent cash game play, actually, despite not being a favorite facing Harvey. I mean, he does have the St. Louis lineup behind him. He's had a couple big games this year, too. He went 7 2/3 against the Cubs the other day. Struck out 10 guys, only gave up 5 hits. That was a really strong outing. He had another really similar outing that early in the season against Milwaukee, too. I mean, he's a guy that's gone 6 innings in almost every start so far. I think the last one he faced Cleveland in was one he struggled probably more than anything, and he still went 5 1/3 and only gave up 2 earned runs. But he walked a bunch of guys and got really high in pitch count, which is really uncharacteristic for him, so I'm not overly worried about that. I think he only has one other game where he's been given up more than 2 walks on the season. So his control's still there. That's what's really helping him with his strikeouts. He's up and down in terms of strikeouts, but the fact that he has that double-digit strikeout upside still is great to see. He's going to be a low-owned guy because he's not a favorite, not a massive strikeout guy consistently. So I think he's a decent GPP play on a short slate tonight too.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I mean, Matt's 28th in the league against right-handed pitching, 19.6% strikeout rate, and one of the lowest team ISOs at 112. So team that does not have very much power. I mean, you've pretty much got Lucas Duda, Kadire, and Granderson to some extent, and outside of that, no one hits for power on that offense. I mean, every once in a while, Wilmer Flores gets a hold of one, but you certainly don't consider him a power hitter. So I think that's a good call there. I mean, he's $8,200 on DraftKings, $8,100 on FanDuel, so a decent price, and like you said, probably the best pitcher, talent-wise, it's going to be under the people's radar today. So
yeah, absolutely.
All right, moving on to a guy that I personally cannot stand. I'm sure you know where I'm going with this one. Dan Haren, $7,800 on FanDuel and $6,600 cheap on DraftKings. I mean, the thing about Dan Haren, I was looking at it, he has the 10th lowest swing strike rate of any pitcher that's qualified this season, which you don't like. You obviously want to get yourself a little bit of upside. He's also facing a Diamondbacks team that has a decent amount of power. They're 13th in the league against right-handed pitching. 148 team ISO. Outside of that, everything else pretty average. But, I mean, there's some big bats you do want to worry about here. Obviously, Dan Haren's been worse against righties throughout the last couple of years of his career than he has against lefties, but he's really struggled with lefties this year. 343 WOBA allowed, 6 home runs already in the season. But not a lot of left-handed bats that you worry about in this lineup. I mean, you got like David Peralta, Ender Inciarte, not much of a power hitter. But at the same time, I mean, the Diamondbacks are one of those teams I really don't like targeting a lot of pitchers against them unless they're a really good pitcher. That's not to say that I have faith in this entire offense, but there's some big bats, and they could put up some runs in a hurry.
Yeah, I mean, Haren's more of a secondary cash game play for me on DraftKings. I mean, he has a decent price. He's been pretty consistent this year. I think he scored at least 13 points in every game except the last one that he's pitched. And that was against the Dodgers, which you can give him a little break on because it's a really tough lineup to face right now.
Yep.
He just doesn't have that massive upside. He's only got one game where he has more than 5 strikeouts on the year. He hasn't been going really deep into starts. He's got a couple 7-inning starts, but I mean, that's probably the max he's going at this point in his career. I think you can feel pretty good about rolling him out there in cash games at 6,600. He's not a guy that you feel is particularly safe, though. Like you mentioned, there's some big bats in the Arizona lineup that can get to him, especially when he makes some mistakes. Like you said, he doesn't miss a lot of bats. So you got to feel pretty good about him at that price, but he's not a guy that you just lock in and forget about.
Yeah, and at nearly $8K on FanDuel, that's too pricey. I mean, we talked about it before. I would much rather go with John Lackey. I think he's a much safer option, $300 more there. All right, moving on next to Rubby De Rosa, a guy that I think is interesting in tournaments tonight. $6,800 on FanDuel, $6,900 on DraftKings. And this is a guy that's quietly having a really good season. 23.1% strikeout rate, 10.7% swinging strike rate. To put that in perspective, that's the same as Mike Fiers. And then you got guys like Chris Sale, Cole Hamels right around 12%. So, I mean, that's a pretty damn good swing and strike rate this season. He's been pretty bad against lefties. 416 wOBA allowed, 5 home runs, but really good against righties. 227 wOBA allowed, 2 home runs. So what you worry about here is the left-handed bats, but then you look for left-handed bats in this lineup. You got D. Gordon, who doesn't have any power, who he gets on against anyone. Obviously, Rubby De Rosa is not stopping him. And then you got Christian Yelich, and that's about it. So, I mean, if he can control Christian Yelich, obviously you still got to maneuver Giancarlo Stanton. I don't care how good you are against righties. You still worry about him. But I think he makes for a really interesting tournament option because you look at this Marlins team as a whole against righties, and they're pretty terrible. 21% strikeout rate, 299 team wOBA, 105 team ISO, is second lowest to the Angels, once again, down there at the bottom. So, I mean, this is not a team with a lot of power, especially at home.
Yeah, prior to Yelich coming back, I mean, they had so few options for left-handed bats in their lineup. I mean, they were running out sometimes all right-handed lineups when D. Gordon was out against righties, and that's just not going to be a recipe for success against righties, especially tough ones. De La Rosa's had a couple big games lately, gone 7 innings in 3 of the last 4. Not a huge strikeout guy, but he tends to be around like that 5, 6, 7 range that's pretty strong, and especially at this kind of price range.
Yep.
Once you get down here, sometimes you're looking at guys with like 2, 3, 4 strikeouts in a game. So he has some nice upside here. I don't particularly love him, but I think he's a really comparable play to Haren with some more upside. Probably going to lean more towards him in GPPs, Haren more in cash games, but I think both of them are pretty strong plays at the prices they're at.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, his worst start looks like, again, against the Dodgers, obviously get a pass there, and then struggled at home against Washington, gave up 4 earned runs and a home run, but if I'm not mistaken, Bryce Harper was responsible for just about all of that, and Bryce Harper pretty much owns every single pitcher in the entire world right now, so I'm sure that he's pretty glad that there's no Bryce Harper in the lineup he's facing tonight. But then he gets Giancarlo Stanton, so not much of a reprieve for him five games later. Moving on next, we only have a few pitchers left. Drew Pomeranz, $6,400 on FanDuel and $5,900 on DraftKings. You mentioned in the podcast earlier, and I've been of the same thinking, targeting hitters at Minute Maid Park has been a great way to go recently, and Drew Pomeranz has just not been very good. I mean, his one strength a couple years ago was his ground ball rate. He's not keeping the ball on the ground anymore. He had a good game against Boston, but if you hadn't noticed, Boston has been awful against left-handed pitching this season, so not much of a surprise there. Before that, we're talking DraftKings points, 1, 8, 7, 9, 9. He has not been good at all. One of those games was against Houston at Houston. Gave up 4 earned runs and a home run in 4 innings. I like a lot of the Houston bats here, and there is no way in hell I'll be playing Drew Pomeranz tonight.
Yeah, that's how I'm feeling. Houston's been too good against lefties. Just not a guy I'm targeting tonight at all.
Just don't. Next up, Kyle Lobstein, $6,300 on FanDuel. And actually the second cheapest pitcher on DraftKings at $4,900. And this is a guy who, I mean, I don't even want to say he's average, and it's good that he's got a pitcher's park here. Gave up 6 earned runs in 2 1/3 against Minnesota last time. Negative 9.6. Was really good in a game against the White Sox, but as we know, White Sox not a very good offense. This is a guy that he's had those occasional decent starts, but I do not think this is the position for him tonight. I like a lot of these Milwaukee bats, hit lefties really well. I'm targeting a lot of Milwaukee bats, and once again, no thanks on Kyle Lobstein.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Don't want to target him at all. If I'm going a cheap guy, I'm going to go with this last guy here, Jordan Lyles for Colorado. I mean, they're playing in Coors, but Philly's lineup's just been terrible.
Yep.
It's a price play more than anything. I mean, the wind's blowing in. Philly's been terrible. He's not a favorite. I mean, he's just a GPP flyer, basically, that you can load up the rest of your lineup, play guys like Cabrera, Goldschmidt, Giancarlo Stanton, stuff like that. There's nothing really especially good to like about him. He hasn't been particularly good on the season, anything like that, but for $4,500 against one of the worst hitting teams in the league, I don't hate it.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, he keeps the ball on the ground almost 50%, 50% ground ball rate. And, I mean, the wind is blowing in Coors Field tonight, so maybe keeps it in the park. I mean, he hasn't given up a home run to a lefty yet this season, so that's encouraging for him considering most of the best bats for the Phillies are left-handed. So, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting play at that price point, like you said. Get your GPP lineup, stack as many batters as you'd like, and go from there. And one last guy, this is a guy that no one knows about, Lance McCullers. He's looks like, from looking at his minor league numbers and talking to Josh, who's our minor league guy, Looks like he's had command issues. He's a high strikeout guy, but the last thing you want as a right-handed pitcher against the Oakland Athletics, especially at Minute Maid Park, is to be a guy with bad command against a team that hits righties extremely well, 4th best in the league, and they're a patient team that walks. There's no way I'm touching this guy. I don't care that nobody's seen him before. Give me a couple starts of him being successful, and this is going to be probably a pretty rude awakening for him against an Athletics lineup that mashes right-handed pitching.
Definitely. I'm staying away from that entirely.
Yep, absolutely. With that, that's going to wrap things up for the Pitcher Nail Down. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. All of our great content for tonight's short slate is going to be at dailyfantasycafe.com, and we will catch you guys tomorrow.